Our next guest will discuss language revitalization in the 21st century and how language loss not only disrupts generational bonds, but also obstructs youth education, perpetuating poverty cycles. Welcome, Programs Director at Wikitongues, Kristen Tcherneshoff.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. As was said, my name is Kristen Tcherneshoff, joining you all from Helsinki, Finland today, and I am the Programs Director at Wikitongues. Thank you all for coming to this presentation and, more importantly, for joining us throughout this day to learn more about the importance of linguistic diversity as a whole. And first off, let us pay homage to the historic struggle of the Bangladeshi people whose efforts in defense of their mother language, Bangla, serve as a poignant reminder of the enduring significance of linguistic rights and cultural identity. If you're unaware of the history behind Mother Language Day, and I'm not sure if others have already covered this earlier in the day, but for those joining, the events leading up to the declaration of the day started in the late 1940s in East Pakistan, which is present-day Bangladesh. And I'm generalizing this history for the sake of brevity for the talk. But in 1948, the government of Pakistan declared Urdu to be the sole national language of Pakistan. And the East Pakistani people protested since the majority of the population was from East Pakistan and their mother language was Bengali, or as the language is endonymically called, Bangla. And they demanded Bangla to be at least one of the national languages alongside Urdu. So to demolish the protest, the government of Pakistan outlawed public meetings and rallies, but the students of the University of Dhaka persisted, and with the support of the general public, they continued to arrange these massive rallies and meetings. And then on the 21st of February, on this day in 1952, police opened fire on the rallies, killing 5 students and injuring hundreds more. Since then, Bangladeshis have honored Mother Language Day as a Memorial Day, as one of their tragic days, and is recognized in Bangladesh as a national holiday. And then decades later, after a lot of lobbying and activism, in 1999, UNESCO formally recognized it as an international day. This story of the International Mother Tongue Language Day serves as a powerful testament to the ongoing global battle for language recognition and language representation. And despite the passage of time, the 7 decades since that tragic day in Dhaka, the threat of language extinction still looms large, with UNESCO warning that as many as 3,000 languages could vanish within the next 80 years, depriving humanity of centuries of cultural, historical, and ecological knowledge. Language extinction, however, is not a natural phenomenon, but rather a consequence of systemic injustices, including economic exclusion, political oppression, and at times, unfortunately, violence. And though the politics of forced assimilation have softened in recent decades, meaning that few governments still explicitly prohibit the use of minoritized languages, the fact remains that the vast majority of languages remain politically unrecognized and under-resourced, an inequity that has created immense challenges for the speakers of languages to teach the next generation. And so on this community level, language extinction is destabilizing. Not only does it break the bond between elders and children, research shows that it reinforces generational trauma, leading to higher rates of substance abuse and suicide, impeding early and primary education, as we're talking about in this session, and entrenching cycles of poverty. And so reversing the trend of language extinction is about more than just words. It underscores cultural heritage, community wisdom, and overall justice. However, the good news is that language revitalization is possible, and with the right resources, anyone can learn their ancestral language and teach the next generation, raising new native speakers and keeping their culture alive. Unfortunately, support for new revitalization projects is scarce, creating a resource bottleneck that leaves too many communities on the sidelines. And so at our nonprofit, Wikitongues, we're working to bridge this institutional gap by creating resources, funding, and support for language revitalizations projects around the world. And for those who are just joining us for the day, I hope this has provided a good base of background context as you continue to learn from and dive deeper into this field with the following presentations after mine. And for those who participated in earlier discussions on rare and dying languages, I hope to not bore you too much with reviews of the issues at hand. Our work at Wikitongues really bridges the gap between this last session's context on dying languages and this session's on multilingual education, So my aim for this discussion is to bridge the thematic areas of historical context and theoretical frameworks with some of the practical applications within the educational realm. And so then the question is, how do you bring a language back from the brink? The great challenge of revitalization is patience, wrapping your head around long-term thinking. And so in very broad strokes, your goal is to reverse the generational trend of linguistic decline. And reversing a generational trend sometimes takes a generation. And so to support this process, we've created a language revitalization accelerator program at Wikitongues, which is an annual fellowship that provides funding and guidance to language activists who are collaborating with their communities to essentially develop strategic plans for their languages. These plans address both short-term and long-term language needs with measurable goals set for 1 year, 3-year, and even decades-long periods. Through this program, we've observed how design thinking serves as the cornerstone for language revitalization, creating space for fellows to approach the challenge of revitalizing a language as a solvable problem. Design thinking, in essence, is a human-centric approach to problem solving, rooted in experimentation and iteration with a deep sense of empathy for the end user. And in our context, that end user isn't just a consumer of a product or a tool. It really represents the last speakers of languages and the broader community struggling to preserve their mother tongues and heritages. Language revitalization involves identifying and addressing barriers to language acquisition. And by engaging in this process, leaders in language revitalization progress through 5 essential stages: empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and iterating. So, as a foundation, the first one, empathy, should always lie at the heart of the approach. And this step, of course, really is intuitive, but it's always nice to acknowledge the process of it and recognize it for what it is. Language revitalization leaders immerse themselves in understanding the unique challenges faced by their communities. And while political and economic marginalization often underlies language extinction, the specific manifestations of the challenges vary based on cultural and linguistic landscapes. And this design thinking process should then begin with listening, interviewing community members to gather insights that inform revitalization strategies. By involving the community in this process, we can inspire collective ownership over the future of our mother tongues. And so once this vision is clear, the revitalization team then transitions to ideation, brainstorming innovative solutions to address language challenges. From organizing pop-up language classes to leveraging mother tongue media and technology, the creative possibilities are really endless. The shift to prototyping marks the transformation of ideas into practical activities, resources, and tools, which are then tested and refined through continuous feedback loops. Through this iterative process, communities make measurable progress in increasing the number of fluent and native speakers, thereby restoring the frequency and culturally relevant use of their language. And so I'd like to highlight this type of work through 3 case studies, people applying these design principles, empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, iterating to daily life. And while the concept of multilingual education, as our session is themed, often conjures images of classrooms filled with eager young minds, it's crucial to also recognize that multilingual education encompasses a broad spectrum of learning experiences, including language revitalization efforts among adults, intergenerational knowledge exchange within communities, and the preservation of cultural heritage. And so from the case studies we review, I hope to show you how these design principles are applied to multilingual education shown through adult education, a traditional education system, and digital tools. And so our first one is meeting Wendy Goodlow. Wendy Goodlow joined us in 2021 for our first cohort of Wikitongues Language Revitalization Accelerator Fellows, and she represents the Black Seminole community in Brackettville, Texas. Their language, Afro-Seminole Creole, which is also known as Black Seminole, Seminole, or just by the acronym ASC, tells a transatlantic story, having emerged in the 18th century when Gullah Geechee speakers escaped enslavement in the southern United States and joined the Seminole Nation in what is now the U.S. state of Florida. There, Gullah Geechee mingled with the Seminole languages Miccosukee and Muskogee, and later with Spanish as the Black Seminoles traveled west to the U.S. and Mexican states of Texas and Coahuila. In time, a unique cultural identity began to form. The Romani linguist, Dr. Ian Hancock, first classified ASC after visiting Brackettville in 1976. By then, thanks in large part to cultural discrimination and its repression in public schools, the language was already in decline, spoken by an aging population. As of 1990, the date of the last known census of the language, there were no more than 200 native speakers, and today, estimates put likely no more than 20. Compounding the challenge of revitalization, the language is also under-resourced, with few recordings and just one abridged dictionary of about 1,000 words. By contrast, the Oxford English Dictionary counts over 500,000 words. And beyond that, while a majority of the Black Seminole community still lives in and around Brackettville, the remaining native speakers are scattered across the Americas. Wendy was among the first members of her community to champion revitalization, having been inspired to keep her language alive after participating in other aspects of cultural preservation. For example, she had supported an effort to save a historically Black Seminole cemetery. She helped launch a Black Seminole Museum, and Wendy was among the organizers of Seminole Days, an annual holiday which celebrates Black Seminole history and culture. So after that, reawakening her language seems like the next necessary step. When Wendy first set out to revitalize ASC, she used design thinking to define their most urgent challenges: the paucity of resources, a scattered population of elder native speakers, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which erected barriers to in-person organizing. And though Wendy's long-term goal was to restore mother tongue fluency in her community and perhaps one day raise a new generation of native speakers, she had to start at the beginning. So to make group learning possible at the height of the pandemic, Wendy and her team partnered with Dr. Hancock to organize recurring webinars on Zoom. To expand community awareness as pandemic restrictions eased, they worked language revitalization into existing heritage efforts by hosting these mother tongue pop-up classes at the more widely attended Seminole Days gatherings. And then on the other side, to address the relative scarcity of language materials, they made resource creation a part of the learning process, involving students in the invention of new words for 21st century concepts, which is an often necessary aspect of revitalizing an under-resourced or critically endangered language. In the past 3 years, Wendy and her team have made tremendous progress towards 3 measurable outcomes: resource availability, community awareness, and learner fluency. For now, they're focusing on sustaining this core team of 5 language champions, and in order to guarantee that a proficient speaker community emerges. But later, they'll adjust their metrics to track the growth of the overall learner population. To date, their most widely attended language workshop actually had 20 students. Eventually, they hope they'll be able to start measuring their success with more ambitious metrics: fluent speakers, the frequency of daily use, and finally, the number of new native speakers. Though they have a long way to go before ASC is once again the predominant mother tongue of the Black Seminole community, design thinking has made it possible to structure an approach to this generational challenge, creating the first opportunity for multilingual learning in decades. Sitting 1,000 miles south of Wendy, a member of our second cohort is applying these participatory design methods to ensure Yucatec Maya is taught to younger generations via a more traditional sense of multilingual education. As a language advocate and linguist with a background in the tourism industry, Hilario Pucahun has intimately understood the paradox of indigenous language rights in the Yucatan Peninsula. In Quintana Roo, where he is based, there are these 2 distinct worlds existing side by side, one emphasizing the historic structures of the region, and the other unfolding along the coastline in Cozumel and Cancun is defined by hotels, resorts, and construction sites. Simultaneously connected and yet apart, these 2 worlds collide as the government-funded roads transport tourists from their beachfront resorts to the Maya ruins, while Yucatec Maya people venture from their hometowns to find jobs on the rapidly growing coast. Originally, Hilario was working in the tourism industry, with plans to continue studying English to move forward in his career. However, he quickly realized that he had the opportunity to improve the way people viewed Yucatec Maya, his mother tongue. The first challenge for him and his project was reinstilling linguistic pride in his community, nowadays numbering around 800,000 people. For centuries, Mayan civilization stood as a global pioneer in mathematics, engineering, and astronomy. Yet this rich knowledge faced a precipitous decline, first at the hands of the Spanish conquest in the 1500s, and later to the restrictive currents of Spanish-centric nationalism. The consequences were profound, manifesting in bans on mother tongue education for Indigenous children, which was a suppression that endured until as recently as 2003. Even now, the confluence of low language prestige and the presence of inadequately trained and compensated teachers form a formidable challenge for the Maya communities. Aspiring students often find themselves forced to continue their education in Spanish, compelled to forsake their heritage language. And this hierarchy imposed by the education system leaves many Indigenous students feeling as though their language is obsolete. For decades, research has shown us that children receive a more comprehensive education and are able to learn faster if attending school in their mother tongue. Through this language of instruction, there is less rote learning and memorization and more hands-on learning, emphasizing a truer, deeper understanding of the content and igniting creativity. These together create the ideal educational setting for intuitive learning. This form of education goes beyond propelling academic achievements. By acknowledging and affirming the cultural identity of students, it also helps enhance their self-confidence and mental well-being. In Australia's Indigenous majority Arnhem Land region, for example, school attendance rates nearly doubled from 50% to as high as 95% after mother tongue education was incorporated into school curriculums. Some schools in the region saw, for the first time, a majority of graduates qualifying for college. Through an education system acknowledging their heritage, children have space to affirm their Indigenous backgrounds as an enriching part of their identities rather than hindrances. And so, in a nod to the innovative scientific creations of the Mayan civilization and the importance of those same applications today, Hilario devised a culturally grounded STEM curriculum. To start the project, he turned towards his community. He interviewed parents, teachers, and students, encouraging them to define their educational needs and goals. From this data, he created the first prototype of the curriculum, which was tested throughout the course of a school year in 5 Indigenous primary schools of Quintana Roo. This real-world application served as a litmus test, allowing Hilario to gauge its effectiveness and gather invaluable insights. After that first year, he conducted thorough surveys, once again engaging the students, parents, and teachers in the refinement process. Hilario has repeated this process 3 times. As of 2024, they are completing the final year of the pilot project. Following this, Hilario and his team are carrying out an additional round of interviews and surveys before finalizing and distributing the curriculum. They anticipate that the success of their project will inspire more schools in the region to adopt it. And through this work, Hilario is not merely crafting a curriculum, he is cultivating a space where young minds can witness the practical application of the Yucatec Maya language. And the impact has been tangible. Following the inaugural year of the pilot project, Hilario's interviews with students revealed a heightened sense of connection with their Mayan heritage. Anecdotes suggest an increased enthusiasm for school among students, showcasing the project's positive impact on their overall experience. And then as a last example, I'd like to talk about applying this style of design thinking into a digital education sphere. Last year, we had someone named Ross Patrick join our 3rd cohort of fellows, and Ross represents the Dendi people, whose homeland straddles the borders of Benin, Nigeria, Niger, and Togo. Unlike ASC, which is in critical condition, and Yucatec Mayan, which is considered threatened, although reawakened, Dendi is technically in a stronger position. According to the last known census of the language, which we don't have great dates on, but happened somewhere between 2000 and 2021, there are over 400,000 speakers, encompassing a majority of the ethnic Dendi population. Beyond that, the language is officially recognized as a minority language in Benin, where a majority of Dendi live, theoretically guaranteeing a degree of institutional support. Strictly speaking, Dendi is not an endangered language yet. But despite the Beninese government's nominal support for Dendi, there are long-term cultural trends that drove Ross to conclude that revitalization-focused projects were necessary to keeping his mother tongue alive. First, the Beninese government's support for minority languages is strictly nominal, allocating few resources to support their development and daily use. There are few, if any, public media in Dende, for example, and the language, though technically official, isn't taught in schools. Rather, French remains the sole language of public life, a vestige of colonial rule. And so in the absence of institutional support, Ross observed that daily use was on the decline. His long-term goal was securing meaningful institutional support for the language, but to build a constituency for reform, he would first need to buffer against that decline of daily use, starting with mother tongue media. Though it's often seen as a homogenizing force, the internet and its related technologies can be great equalizing forces for endangered and under-resourced languages. For example, research in Ethiopia has shown that mother tongue access on mobile devices can be a powerful safeguard against language decline. And in Catalonia, Spain, where the growth of Catalan since 1980 is widely regarded as a language revitalization success story, media has helped drive mother tongue development. In fact, in 1984, the regional government in Catalonia committed to subsidizing private sector media creation, guaranteeing an ecosystem of Catalan language journalism, television, and literature, normalizing its use outside schools and public institutions. By the turn of the 21st century, there was widespread organic demand for Catalan media, which, beyond reducing the need for government subsidies, spawned grassroots campaigns for getting the language online. In 2012, for example, Catalan-speaking users translated the Twitter interface, and in 2001, La Wikipedia Catalana became the third language edition of Wikipedia, 3 months after English and German, and actually 2 months before Spanish. Today, there are upwards of 365 mother tongue editions of Wikipedia, and with some exceptions, virtually any culture can add their language to that list. Launching a new language version of Wikipedia incorporates community organizing, translating articles from existing Wikipedias into the target language, and composing new articles in the target language. This process, Ross determined, made the online encyclopedia an ideal vehicle for digitizing Dende, creating a space for more people to learn via their mother tongue. Through online organizing and in-person events, Ross and his team have composed about 60 articles in their language over the past year, and they're now awaiting approval from the Wikimedia Foundation to move from beta into a formal Wikipedia subdomain so they can formally launch. After launching, they plan to shift their success metrics to tracking the growth in articles, which represents the expansion of mother tongue resources, and by also measuring the number of active users, which represents the impact of those resources on Dende society. By using design thinking, Ross was able to answer an abstract problem, the Dende community's declining use of their own language, with a measurable, structured solution. In less than a year, he seeded the first ever movement to sustain his language, expand resources for mother tongue education, and he got his language online. So throughout our language revitalization accelerator program at Wikitongues, the guiding principle has been community-led design, partnering with endangered language communities to co-create sustainable pathways for language preservation, revitalization, and documentation. By applying these design principles, we can breathe new life into endangered languages. And so as we reflect on the journeys of these stories I've shared, and as we listen to more real-life examples of how people are addressing these challenges in educational settings in the following presentations, let us not forget the broader significance of their efforts. Language extinction is not just a loss of words, it's a loss of identity, knowledge, and connection to our shared human experience. And so by supporting language revitalization projects, advocating for multilingual education, and embracing the principles of design thinking, each of us has the power to make a difference.
Kristen, that was fascinating. And thank you for sharing so many examples of how language preservation is being maintained. I have a couple of questions for you, if I may. So civilizations have evolved over millennia as a result of economic, political, military, religious, and social factors. And many languages have been lost in that time and new ones created, creating a new facet of culture. Now, this is nothing new, as I've just alluded to. It's historical, and perhaps this is going to, it's existing, it's happening in this day and age as well. So, I was interested to hear from you, especially in reference to Bangladesh. You mentioned Bangladesh. whilst Bangla is established there now, many are campaigning for the right of the mother language, of their mother language, their mother tongue, including Sylheti, and for it to be recognized as a second or third language of the country. Now, it would be great to hear your thoughts on that, but this isn't isolated. This is global. This is going to be happening in other countries around the world, is it not?
Definitely. It's happening in countries all around the world as we speak. As I said, in Spain, there's been the very well-known push for language representation and recognition of Catalan. You have
you mentioned that as a success story. And what I'm trying to understand in this question is there's other languages like Sylheti and various others around the world. How can they equally get that kind of success story, as you called it, of Catalan?
Okay. So the question is, how can we have success? That is a very broad question because we have so many different situations, right? So in every country, there is going to be a different political thing, a different political situation. And so the way that we found to best answer that, it sounds a bit more crass, but it's worked for us in terms of how we work with activists, is creating a strategic plan, which is something that you do when you're building a company or a nonprofit. And so if we try to approach language revitalization as a long-term plan. So if you're starting a company or a nonprofit, you would think, what do I want for my nonprofit a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? The same with a company, right? Like, we need to start making money back. How are we going to do that? How are we going to convince people to buy our product? And that sounds a bit crass when we're talking about something like cultural and something that, you know, really speaks to the emotional aspects and the future of our humanity. But it's something that started to work, and it makes it easier to figure out the steps and who we need to involve to make something happen. And so the situations will be different for every single country. I've been getting the emails and signed the petition for the recognition of the Sylheti language, and that's great to see. There seems to be a lot of community organizing around that. And so that's a great example of someone looking at the problem, figuring out how has this been done successfully in the past, right? We're looking at Bangladesh, maybe the Sylheti activists. I don't know any of them personally, but perhaps they looked at the history of their country, how Bangladesh was able to get recognition, national recognition, of course, a different government at the time, but what worked in that context, in that situation. The Sylheti team asked, what do we want? We want legal recognition. And so looking at that, it seems like they've made a plan. It seems from their emails and what they're going for, they've made a timeline, they've gotten together a community, and they're focusing on this one specific goal. So my recommendation is build a strategic plan, figure out one goal that you want to focus on. Of course, when we're talking about languages, we want all of it, right? We all want to have legal recognition. We want our language taught in schools. We want to have digital tools for our language. I think focusing on one thing and building out a plan for that can help
creating a structured approach. Creating a structured approach. So I just have we're almost out of time. So I was just wondering if I could get a brief response to you about, we talked about minority languages wanting to be established and be recognized. And in doing this kind of work to tackle the root causes of language loss and addressing these challenges, can you just talk you mentioned it about cultural sensitivities, but how can we ensure that they are fully, or we work towards fully respecting that? Because there's a lot of sensitivities involved in this.
So the question is, how can we work to make sure that we are being culturally aware, culturally sensitive of our work?
Our approaches are culturally sensitive, yeah.
Well,
because like you said, there's a political aspect to it. There's an economic aspect to it. There's so much that contributes to all this. It can be perceived as hugely challenging, right?
It is hugely challenging, and it's important to work with the communities, right? So all of these language revitalization projects that I talked about and all the hundreds others I could speak to, they all start within the community themselves, right? If you don't have any language speakers, There are situations where people do not have any speakers left, like in Taiwan, there's the Taiwan language, and there is no native speakers, but they have cultural heritage and they're working on reawakening the language together. And so as long as it starts in the community and you have community buy-in, I think you'll be safe with making sure that this follows a culturally sensitive and culturally aware approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the people who speak it involved contributes to that. Thank you so much, Kristen. Really, really interesting to hear from you.